All right, let's dive right in. We're going to talk about the first shots of the American Revolution. We'll unpack how a supposedly secret British mission to grab some weapons just exploded into a full-day battle and basically set the stage for the entire War of Independence.
You've probably heard this famous line, "The shot heard round the world." Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote that decades later, and man did he nail it. He really captured how this one single day, April 19, 1775, took a local skirmish and turned it into a revolution. So how did it all start? Well, it began in a city that was just simmering with tension.
So let's set the scene. We're in Boston, which at the time was occupied by the British. For years, things have been getting worse and worse. Arguments over taxes, over rights, you name it. The city was basically a powder keg, just waiting for a spark.
It really kicked off with the Boston Tea Party. In response, a furious British Parliament passed these really punitive laws. The colonists called them the Intolerable Acts. But you know what? Instead of crushing their spirit, it just made them dig in their heels. Pretty soon, the First Continental Congress was endorsing organized resistance, and by early 1775, King George himself had declared Massachusetts to be in a state of rebellion. The fuse was officially lit.
With rebellion now the official word, the Patriot colonists started organizing like never before. They formed local militias and started stashing away weapons. So you've got these two sides on a collision course. On one side, the British regulars, the Redcoats, professional soldiers from the most powerful army on the planet. And on the other, you've got the Patriot militias. We're talking farmers, blacksmiths, citizen soldiers, including the famous Minutemen, guys who swore they'd be ready to fight at a moment's notice.
So the British military governor, General Thomas Gage, he sees all this happening and he decides it's time to act. He figures he can launch a quick, decisive, secret operation and just nip this whole rebellion in the bud.
The plan on paper was pretty simple. A force of 700 regulars would slip out of Boston under the cover of darkness. They'd march to Concord, grab all the colonial weapons and supplies, and maybe, just maybe, they'd also capture two of the rebellion's biggest leaders, Samuel Adams and John Hancock, who they heard were staying in Lexington right on the way.
Yeah, about that secret mission, turns out it wasn't nearly as secret as General Gage had hoped. The Patriots had a really effective spy network. And get this, some historians even think that one of their most important sources was Margaret Kemble Gage, the general's own American-born wife, who was pretty sympathetic to the colonists' cause.
So once the Patriots got the warning that the British were on the move, they acted fast. You know the story. They hung two lanterns in the Old North Church, the signal that the British were crossing the Charles River by boat. 2 if by sea. That sent riders, like the famous Paul Revere, galloping out into the countryside to sound the alarm. The regulars are coming.
So as the sun starts to come up on April 19th, the British advance guard marches right into the little town of Lexington. And this is it. This is where the first real confrontation is about to happen.
Now, facing down these hundreds of British professional soldiers was a small company of about 80 local guys. Just 80! Their leader was Captain John Parker, a tough veteran who was actually pretty sick with tuberculosis at the time. He knew they were massively outnumbered, but they were determined to make some kind of stand.
You can just feel the tension in Captain Parker's orders, right? He's not trying to start a fight, but he is absolutely not going to back down. Nobody on either side wanted to be the one to fire that first shot and start an actual war.
In this incredibly tense standoff, a British officer screamed at the militia to lay down their arms and leave. And then, a single shot rang out. To this day, nobody really knows for sure who fired it. The accounts from both sides are completely different. It's one of history's great mysteries.
That one shot just unleashed total chaos. The British soldiers, maybe without orders, fired a massive volley right into the militia's ranks. When all the smoke cleared, 8 militiamen were dead on the ground and 10 more were wounded. Among them was a man named Prince Estabrook, a black patriot who was fighting right alongside his neighbors. The revolution had just claimed its first lives.
So the British soldiers got back in formation and kept marching toward their main objective, Concord. But thanks to Paul Revere and the other riders, their biggest advantage, the element of surprise, was long, long gone.
The British got to Concord and started searching for the weapons, but they didn't find much. The Patriots had already moved most of the stash. So they started burning some of the stuff they did find, like cannon carriages, and this sent a big plume of smoke up into the sky. Well, the militia, now about 400 strong on a hill overlooking the town, they see that smoke and they immediately fear the worst. The regulars are burning their homes. That was the tipping point. The militia decided they had to march down and confront the small British force, only about 100 men, who were holding the North Bridge. When they needed a leader to go first, Captain Isaac Davis from the Acton Minutemen didn't even hesitate.
So the British fired a couple of warning shots, but this time the colonists were ordered to fire back. And this wasn't some mysterious single shot in the confusion. This was an organized, deliberate volley. The Patriots actually inflicted casualties, and it totally stunned the professional soldiers, forcing them to retreat from the bridge. This was a huge moment.
The fight at Concord completely changed the dynamic of the day. Now, the British faced a terrifying 16-mile march back to Boston. It was a fighting retreat, and they were harassed by colonial militia the entire way.
The retreat became a running gauntlet. Thousands of militiamen started swarming in from all the surrounding towns, using guerrilla tactics, firing from behind stone walls, trees, anything they could find. At places that would become famous, like Miriam's Corner and the Bloody Angle, they inflicted heavy casualties. For the British, this was a complete shock. They weren't fighting a disorganized mob, they were up against a determined and very adaptable enemy. In fact, their whole column was on the verge of collapse before reinforcements finally showed up. By the time the battered British forces finally made it back to safety, they'd suffered nearly 300 casualties. The Patriots, by comparison, had 93. And the colonists, they were so emboldened, they didn't just go home. They surrounded Boston, trapping the British Army inside and kicking off the nearly year-long siege of Boston.
And that's how, in just a single day, a political protest morphed into a full-blown war. News of the fighting spread like wildfire. The Second Continental Congress got together, created a formal Continental Army, and they appointed a guy named George Washington to lead it. The American Revolution had well and truly begun.
So why do we remember this day so vividly? If the first shot is still a mystery, what made it heard round the world? Well, it wasn't just about that one shot. It was about the clear, undeniable decision by thousands of ordinary citizens to pick up arms, to stream toward a single road, and to fight for an idea. They're the ones who turned a local skirmish into a revolution that would create a new nation and inspire people all over the globe.